You won't believe what happened when my HOA neighbor, Karen, tried hosting an entire community party on my land without asking. So before this story takes its wildest turn, make sure you hit that subscribe button and follow Sham Stories for more jaw-dropping HOA drama that'll make your blood boil and your heart race. It all started on a quiet Saturday morning. It's the kind of morning where you expect peace, coffee, and the sound of birds. Not 10 buses full of HOA members rumbling down your driveway. My name's Mark, and I live on 15 acres of private land that my family has owned for generations. It's just outside the line of the Cedar Pines HOA community. When I bought the land from my father, I made sure it stayed out of the HOA's reach because I didn't want to deal with power-hungry neighbors and endless petty rules. The problem was, my property bordered the community park that the HOA often used for its exclusive events. And for years they'd been trying to get me to join the association. Karen, the self-proclaimed president and queen of the HOA, had been the most persistent of them all. She'd shown up uninvited more times than I could count, trying to tell me how I should keep my grass shorter or how my old barn didn't fit the community aesthetic. I'd always told her politely but firmly that I wasn't under their control, that my property was private and had nothing to do with their rules. But this time, Karen decided to push things far beyond annoying straight into illegal. That morning, I woke up to a cloud of dust rising in the distance and the rumble of heavy engines. I thought maybe it was a road crew or some delivery trucks passing by. But when I looked through my binoculars, I saw something that made my jaw drop in charter buses. The kind that usually carried tourists or sports teams lined up at my main gate. Men in neon vests were setting up tents, folding tables, banners that said Cedar Pines Annual Community Celebration, and huge coolers of drinks. And there, standing at the center of it all with her oversized sunglasses and clipboard, was Karen, barking orders like a general leading a parade. I couldn't believe it. My land, my private property. They had driven right in like they owned the place. Apparently, they had opened the side gate, which I kept unlocked for delivery access to the ranch, and decided to treat my open field like a public park. I grabbed my phone, started recording from the porch, and walked toward the chaos. As I got closer, I could hear the music blasting from portable speakers and kids running around, laughing while parents set up picnic blankets on my grass. I was angry, but I wanted to handle it smartly. I approached Karen, who was too busy yelling at a food truck driver to notice me until I was right beside her. When she turned, her fake smile froze for a second before she forced it back into place. "Oh, Mark, you made it. Isn't this wonderful? I figured since your property is right next to the park, it would be perfect to host this year's HOA celebration," she said, as if it were some kind of compliment. I stared at her, trying to keep calm. "Karen, this is my land. You didn't ask for permission, and you can't just bring an entire neighborhood onto private property." She waved her hand like it was nothing. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Mark. It's just for one afternoon. Everyone's having fun, and besides, you never use this field anyway. Consider it a good deed for the community." That was the last straw. My patience snapped. "You've got 10 minutes to get everyone off my land, Karen," I said coldly. "Or I'll make sure every one of these buses leaves with a fine and every one of your little friends learns what trespassing really means." She rolled her eyes and laughed like I was joking. "You wouldn't dare ruin this event. We've got sponsors, families, and guests here. If you cause a scene, you'll just make yourself look bad." That's when I realized Karen thought she had power over me. She was so used to bullying her neighbors through rules that she couldn't imagine someone standing up to her outside her little empire. So, I turned around, walked back to my truck, and made a call not to the police, but to my friend Ben, who worked for the county. I told him what was happening and asked about my rights. He confirmed what I already knew: this was private property. And the moment they crossed the boundary without permission, it was trespassing. He suggested I gather evidence, let them dig their own hole, and then take action. So that's what I did. For the next hour, I filmed everything: buses unloading, people setting up decorations, Corinne posing for photos under a banner that said "Hosted by the Cedar Pines HOA," and even a drone hovering overhead, capturing footage for their community page. Every single moment was proof that they were using my land illegally. By noon, the field was packed. They had a live band, food trucks, inflatable games, and even a makeshift stage for speeches. It was like a full-blown festival. I stood by my barn, arms crossed, watching them take over what was mine. My anger burned deeper with every laugh and every cheer that echoed through my property. When I saw one of the kids carving initials into a tree near my fence line, I knew I had to act, but not in rage. I wanted Karen to learn her lesson in a way she'd never forget. I waited until every bus had unloaded, every car had parked, and everyone was fully settled. Then, when no one was paying attention, I walked over to my main gate, took out the heavy chain I used for my cattle enclosure, wrapped it around the entrance, and clicked the padlock shut. I walked to the back gate and did the same. My property had 2 main exits, and now both were locked tight. An hour later, I saw Karen finally notice something was off. The first bus driver had gone to leave for a supply run but couldn't get the gate open. She came running across the field, her face red with irritation. "Mark, what the hell is going on? Why is the gate locked?" I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Because this is private property and you're trespassing. You didn't ask permission. You didn't respect my boundaries. And now you'll wait until I decide you can leave." The look on her face was priceless, a mix of shock, anger, and disbelief. "You can't do this," she shouted. "This is illegal." I laughed softly. "Actually, Karen, what's illegal is what you did. I've got everything on video, every bus, every tent, every uninvited person stepping foot on my land. So unless you want the sheriff here writing up trespassing charges for all 200 of your guests, I suggest you sit tight," she stormed off, pulling out her phone, probably calling the HOA board or trying to get someone to back her up. But there was nothing they could do. The next few hours were pure chaos. Parents panicked, kids cried, and the bus drivers argued with each other. The food vendors complained they couldn't get out. I sat on my porch, sipping lemonade, watching the storm unfold like it was a movie. Every call Karen made ended the same way: no help. The police told her it was a civil matter, and since I had video proof of trespassing, I was in the right. The sheriff even called me directly, laughing as he told me to enjoy the free entertainment. And enjoy it I did. For years, Karen had made life miserable for dozens of people in Cedar Pines, fining them for having the wrong mailbox color, threatening homeowners for having guests park on the street, and reporting dogs that barked too loud. Now she was the one trapped, powerless, humiliated in front of her entire community. I could see the frustration eating her alive as she realized she'd been outplayed. By evening, the sun dipped low, and the party that had started with laughter and music had turned into a mess of angry voices and desperation. People were calling for rides, trying to climb fences, or begging Karen to fix it. And I just stood there, waiting for the right moment to twist the knife a little deeper. "You know, Karen," I said as I walked over to her, "maybe next time you'll think twice before taking what isn't yours." She didn't answer, just glared at me with that look of defeat mixed with pride. I almost felt bad, but then I remembered every smug smirk she'd given me over the years. Every rule she tried to impose. Every person she'd bullied. This wasn't just payback, it was justice. And as the last of the sunlight faded, I knew this was only the beginning of a lesson she'd never forget. As the evening settled and the air grew colder, the party that had once been filled with laughter and music now echoed with frustration, confusion, and the sound of people realizing they had no way out. From my porch, I could see clusters of neighbors gathering near the locked gates, arguing among themselves, their voices carrying through the still air. Some of them were trying to call for help, but the area didn't have strong reception. And even when they managed to reach someone, no one was willing to come all the way out here to rescue a crowd of trespassers who had willingly followed their HOA president onto private property. The glow from the food trucks was starting to dim as they began to run out of power, and Karen was pacing like a lion in a cage. Her phone glued to her ear, her perfect hair now frizzed by the humidity and stress. I sat back, letting the weight of what had happened sink in. For once, I wasn't the one being cornered or told what to do. For once, the tables had turned completely, and Karen was finally facing the consequences of her arrogance. Still, deep down, I knew I couldn't keep them locked in there forever. I wasn't a cruel man. I just wanted her and everyone there to understand what trespassing meant, how it felt to be treated like your space didn't matter. As the crowd grew restless, a few of the HOA members approached my porch hesitantly. They weren't the loud, bossy types like Karen. They were regular folks who looked embarrassed and uncomfortable. One of them, a middle-aged man named Dennis, who I vaguely recognized from the community, spoke up first. "Hey, Mark, look, we didn't know this was your property. Karen told us it was part of the park. We wouldn't have come if we'd known." His voice was apologetic, his tone genuine, and I could see the discomfort in his eyes. I nodded, leaning against the railing. "I know, Dennis. I don't blame most of you. But your president here made a decision for everyone without asking or checking facts." He sighed and looked back toward Karen, who was still on her phone, barking orders at no one. "That sounds like her," he muttered. "She doesn't listen to anyone. Maybe this time she'll finally learn." Another woman spoke up, holding her child close. "Please, Mark, it's getting dark, and the kids are tired. Can't we just leave? We'll make sure Karen apologizes." I stared at the crowd, my heart softening a little as I saw the kids huddled near their parents, some wrapped in blankets, some crying quietly. It wasn't their fault. They were just victims of Karen's ego. I decided it was time to make my point loud and clear. I walked to the center of the field, where Karen stood surrounded by her board members, her voice sharp and desperate. "Karen," I called out, my tone carrying across the open air. Everyone turned to look. "You wanted to use my property without permission? You thought I wouldn't stand up for myself because you're used to everyone bowing down to you. Well, now you've got your lesson. You don't run this place. You don't own me, and you don't control this land." She glared at me, but there was fear behind her eyes now. "Mark, this is ridiculous. You've made your point. Unlock the gates and let us go. I'll make sure everyone forgets about this." I smirked. "Oh, you'll make sure they forget." "No, Karen, you're going to make sure everyone remembers. You're going to stand here and admit what you did to them, to your community, and to me. You're going to apologize, right here, in front of everyone." The crowd murmured, surprised, and Karen's face turned crimson. "You can't be serious," she hissed. "You expect me to humiliate myself?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You humiliated yourself the moment you decided to steal what wasn't yours. I'm not asking you to do this for me. I'm asking you to do it for them." For a long moment, she just stood there, her pride battling with the reality that she had no power left. Finally, she took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and faced the crowd. "Everyone," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "it seems there's been a misunderstanding. This property belongs to Mark, and I made a mistake assuming it was part of the park. I apologize for any inconvenience this has caused." Her words were hollow, forced, the kind of apology meant to save face, not to express regret. I shook my head. "Try again," I said. That sounded like something out of a corporate memo. She shot me a deadly glare, but said nothing more. The crowd was silent, watching the power dynamic crumble. Finally, one of the HOA board members stepped forward, shaking his head. "Karen, enough. You've gone too far. You put us all in this mess because you can't admit when you're wrong." His voice carried authority, and others started to nod in agreement. It was like watching a kingdom revolt against its queen. The cracks in Karen's control were showing, and for the first time, she didn't have a script to hide behind. I decided to end the spectacle before it turned ugly. "All right," I said. "Here's what's going to happen. I'll unlock the gates, but before anyone leaves, I'm taking down every one of those banners with my property's name on them. I expect every single bus and vendor to clean up before they go. You came onto private land without asking. You'll leave it cleaner than you found it." There were murmurs of agreement and relief. People began moving quickly, folding chairs, taking down decorations, and packing up supplies. It was almost impressive how fast they worked once they realized the situation was real. Meanwhile, Karen stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching her perfect event crumble around her. I unlocked the main gate, but kept it closed for the time being. As they cleaned, I recorded the process, making sure everything was documented for my own records. I had no intention of pressing charges, not yet, but I wanted leverage in case Karen tried to twist the story later, which I knew she would. By the time the sun had fully set, the field was nearly empty. The buses were lined up again, their engines idling, waiting for permission to leave. The once cheerful banners now lay crumpled on the ground, and the music equipment had been packed away in silence. Karen walked up to me one last time, her face pale and her tone clipped. "You've made your point, Mark. Don't think this is over. You'll regret embarrassing me like this." I smiled faintly. "No, Karen. You'll regret trying to take advantage of the wrong man." With that, I unchained the gate and waved the first bus through. One by one, the vehicles rolled out, headlights sweeping across the dirt road as they disappeared into the night. When the last one left, I closed the gate again and locked it, this time from the outside, just to remind myself that boundaries mattered. The silence that followed was heavy, peaceful in a strange way. I stood there under the stars, breathing in the cool air, letting the tension drain away. I thought about what had happened. How something that started as a simple act of arrogance had turned into a full-blown lesson in accountability. Part of me expected Karen to back off after this, to learn her place and move on. But a smaller, sharper part of me knew that people like her didn't let things go. She would come back, not because she cared about the land, but because she couldn't stand losing control. And that thought both annoyed and intrigued me, because if she wanted to play games, she'd soon find out that I could play them better. A few days later, I got the first sign that Karen hadn't learned her lesson. I received a letter, an official-looking one, addressed to property owner, parcel number 117B, which was my land. It had the Cedar Pines HOA letterhead and a bold headline, "Notice of Unauthorized Event Interference." The letter accused me of unlawfully obstructing a sanctioned community event and causing distress to HOA members. It was signed by none other than Karen herself, with the board stamp at the bottom. She was actually trying to make me look like the bad guy. I sat down at my desk, unfolded the letter again, and read it 3 times, each time shaking my head in disbelief. Then I smiled. If Karen wanted to turn this into a legal fight, she had no idea what kind of storm she was walking into. I called my lawyer, a man named Peter, who'd helped me secure my property's zoning rights years ago. I sent him the videos, the timestamps, the witness statements, and even the footage from the sheriff's call. He called me back an hour later, laughing. "Mark, this woman is insane. You've got them dead to rights. If they push this, we can hit them with a lawsuit so hard they'll be holding bake sales for 10 years to pay it off." It gave me an idea, one that would make sure Karen's arrogance cost her more than just embarrassment. If she wanted to make it official, then so would I. The next morning, I woke up early, made a pot of black coffee, and sat on the porch, staring at the letter again. The audacity of Karen still amazed me. After trespassing, humiliating herself in front of hundreds, and being caught on camera doing it, she still had the nerve to accuse me of wrongdoing. But in a strange way, it was exactly what I wanted. She had taken the bait, and now I could make sure she'd never tried something like that again. I spent the next few hours organizing all the footage, printing photos of the buses, the banners, and her giving orders with a clipboard in her hand. I even took screenshots of her HOA's social media posts from that day they had proudly announced. Cedar Pines Annual Celebration, hosted by HOA. President Karen Miles, with dozens of pictures showing my land in the background. She had publicly admitted to everything without even realizing it. When I sent the evidence to my lawyer, Peter, he replied within minutes. "Mark, you can file for damages, trespassing, and unauthorized commercial use of private property. This could get you a big settlement, or at least force them to shut up for good." That sounded tempting, but I didn't want money. I wanted justice and peace. I wanted Karen and her board to understand that the law worked both ways, and that even someone living outside their HOA bubble could fight back. By noon, I decided to pay the HOA office a visit. It was a small building at the edge of their gated community, decorated with expensive landscaping, and a bronze plaque that read Cedar Pines Homeowners Association, established 1997. The irony of that plaque wasn't lost on me. They were proud of their empire. Proud of how they'd turned a peaceful neighborhood into a place of fear and control. As I walked in, the receptionist looked nervous. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. I gave her a polite smile. "Yes, I'm here to drop off some documents for Karen Miles on the board. She nodded quickly and led me to the conference room where the board meetings were held. When I stepped inside, I saw 5 people sitting around a long table, including Karen, who froze the moment she saw me. Her fake smile returned instantly, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. "Mark," she said in that tone that tried to sound professional but carried venom underneath. "What brings you here?" I dropped a thick folder onto the table. "Evidence," I said simply. "Photos, videos, statements, and even a letter from the sheriff confirming your event was held illegally on my property. I came here to give you one chance to make this right before I take it to court." The room went quiet. One of the board members, an older man with gray hair named Frank, leaned forward and flipped through the papers. His face tightened as he saw the proof. "Karen," he said slowly, "is this true? Did you use his land without permission?" Karen scoffed. "It's not that simple, Frank. We've been trying to integrate Mark's property into the community for years. It's just an open field. I didn't think he'd make such a big deal over it." Couldn't believe my ears. "Not a big deal?" I snapped. "You brought 200 people, 10 buses, and a full setup onto private land. You turned my home into your playground. And now you think you can just shrug it off?" Frank shot her a look that could cut glass. "Karen, this isn't something we can ignore. He's got us dead to rights. If this goes public, we're finished." The rest of the board members nodded reluctantly. They all looked tired, like they'd spent years cleaning up after her ego, and this was the final straw. Karen folded her arms and stared at me defiantly. "What do you want, Mark?" she demanded. "You're not getting a payout from the HOA. We're not going to fund your little revenge fantasy." I smiled faintly. "I don't want money, Karen. I want accountability. I want a public statement from you admitting what you did. And I want a written agreement from this HOA that you will never attempt to enter, use, or involve my property in your community activities again. Ever. If you do, I'll press charges immediately." Her jaw tightened. And for a moment, I could see her pride crumble. Frank nodded. "That seems fair. It's better than a lawsuit." But Karen couldn't let it go. "This is insane," she hissed. "We can't just bow down to him. He's been a thorn in this HOA's side since he moved here. He doesn't belong here." I stepped closer to the table, meeting her glare. "Exactly, Karen. I don't belong to your HOA, and you'd better remember that. You don't get to control everything around you." The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Frank sighed and looked at her sternly. "We're voting on this right now. All in favor of complying with Mark's request?" 4 hands went up immediately. Karen's was the only one that didn't. She looked around, realizing she'd just lost the one thing she valued most: control. When I left that office, I could feel her fury following me like heat from a fire. I knew she wouldn't accept defeat easily. People like Karen never did. They'd rather burn everything down than admit they were wrong. And sure enough, that evening, I got a call from one of my neighbors who lived on the HOA side. His name was Greg, and he'd always been decent to me. "Hey, Mark," he said quietly, "I thought you should know. Karen's been going door to door spreading lies about you. She's telling everyone you trapped families, locked children in, and endangered people at that party. She's twisting the story to make herself the victim." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, my anger simmering again. "Thanks for letting me know, Greg," I said. "I figured she'd try something like that." He sighed.
"Don't worry, man.
"Most of us know the truth. We saw the videos online. You did what you had to do." That reassured me a little, but I knew rumors had a way of spreading faster than facts, especially when someone as manipulative as Karen was behind them. Over the next few days, things got tense. Whenever I went into town, I noticed people whispering. Some gave me sympathetic nods. Others looked uncertain. The HOA page had posted a vague statement claiming that a local resident interfered with a community event, causing distress and disruption, but they conveniently left out every important detail. My inbox filled with messages from homeowners who were fed up with the HOA's corruption. Many of them shared their own stories: unfair fines, threats, intimidation, and harassment. It seemed Karen had made enemies everywhere she went. And now that someone had finally stood up to her, the cracks were spreading. People were starting to realize they didn't need to live in fear of her anymore. It wasn't just about my land anymore. It had become a symbol of resistance. Then, about a week later, the situation escalated in a way I didn't expect. I was driving back from town when I noticed two black SUVs parked near my gate. At first, I thought maybe someone had gotten lost. But when I got closer, I saw Karen standing there with a clipboard again, this time surrounded by what looked like surveyors and a man in a suit. I parked my truck and walked over, my heart pounding. "What now, Karen?" I asked, my patience already thin. She turned to me with that same smug smile I'd grown to hate. "Oh, Mark, don't look so alarmed. We're just conducting a land survey. The HOA board has decided to reevaluate the boundary lines between our community and your property. There seems to be some confusion about where your land ends and ours begins." I laughed bitterly. "Confusion? You mean you're trying to steal part of my land now?" The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Sir, this is a standard evaluation. If we find that a portion of your field falls within the HOA zoning expansion, you'll have to comply with the regulations." My fists clenched. "That's not going to happen. You're not touching an inch of my property." Karen's smile widened. "We'll see about that." She turned and started walking toward the open field with her surveyors, acting as if I wasn't even there. That was it. I stepped in front of her and blocked her path. "You step foot on my land again and I'll call the sheriff right now." She tilted her head, still smiling. "Go ahead, Mark, call him. I'm sure he'd love to hear about how hostile you've been toward the community." My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Karen, I'm warning you, this ends now. You've already embarrassed yourself once. Don't make me do it again." She gave me a long, cold stare before finally turning back to her car. "You can't stop progress," she said softly, almost like a threat. Then she drove off, leaving me standing there with a pit of dread growing in my stomach. It was clear this wasn't over. Karen was planning something big, and I had no idea just how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted. For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was plotting something behind the scenes. I knew her type people like her didn't stop when they lost. They doubled down until they found a new way to win. Even if it meant twisting the truth or breaking the law. The incident with the surveyors wasn't just about boundaries. It was about control. She couldn't stand the fact that I had humiliated her, that I had made her look powerless in front of the entire HOA community. She wanted revenge. And she wanted to reclaim her image as the untouchable queen of Cedar Pines. The following week, I started noticing unfamiliar vehicles slowing down near my property line. SUVs with tinted windows parked near the fence, drones hovering in the distance, strangers pretending to be joggers who always seemed to stop near my mailbox. It didn't take a genius to figure out that Karen was behind it. She was trying to intimidate me, to send a message that she still had influence. But she underestimated me again. I wasn't the kind of man who backed down when pushed. If she wanted a war, I'd make sure she regretted ever starting one. I went to the county recorder's office and pulled up all the official land maps, ownership records, and zoning data. My property boundaries were crystal clear, recorded decades ago, and not 1 inch of it fell within Cedar Pines' jurisdiction. The HOA had no legal authority to touch it. I gathered every document, had copies notarized, and sent them directly to Karen and the board with a formal CSA desis letter drafted by my lawyer. Peter, it was a simple, direct warning. Any further harassment, trespassing, or false claims would result in immediate legal action. I thought that might be enough to finally shut her down. But Karen didn't respond with silence. She responded with escalation. The next morning, I woke up to find a new sign installed right outside my front gate, planted in the ground by the road. It read in bold letters, "Cedar Pines HOA community rules apply beyond this point." I stood there staring at it for a long moment, my blood boiling. She was trying to rewrite reality itself, to convince people that my land belonged to her community. I grabbed my wrench, ripped the sign out of the ground, and threw it into the back of my truck. Then I called Peter again. "She's not getting the message," I said through clenched teeth. He chuckled darkly. "Then we'll send one she can't ignore." That afternoon, Peter filed a formal complaint against the HOA for boundary harassment and fraudulent representation. He also sent a notice to their insurance carrier, alerting them to potential liability for their president's actions. I knew Karen valued her image more than anything, and the thought of being tied up in a legal mess would make her squirm. But she still didn't back off. Instead, she tried to manipulate public opinion. A few days later, the local paper ran a small piece about a dispute between a landowner and the Cedar Pines HOA, portraying me as some stubborn outsider refusing to cooperate with community efforts. I could tell she had fed the reporter her version of events. So I did what she never expected, went public too. I uploaded the full video from the day of the party, showing every detail: the buses driving in, the decorations, her giving orders, and me locking the gate. I posted it on social media with the caption, "When the HOA decides your private property is their playground." Within hours, it exploded. Thousands of views turned into hundreds of thousands. People flooded the comments with outrage toward Karen and her HOA. Local news outlets picked it up. Neighbors started sending me private messages, thanking me for standing up to her. Some even offered to testify on my behalf if things went to court. Karen must have lost her mind when she saw it, because that evening, she showed up at my gate again, furious. Her car screeched to a stop, and she marched toward me with a folder in her hand. "How dare you post that video?" she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "You made me a laughingstock. Do you have any idea what you've done?" I folded my arms and stayed calm. "All I did was show the truth, Karen. You made yourself a laughingstock." She pointed a finger at me, shaking. "You're going to take it down, or I'll sue you for defamation." I couldn't help but laugh. Defamation. Everything in that video is factual. You trespassed. I filmed it, and the sheriff confirmed it. You don't get to rewrite what happened. She went silent for a second, then dropped her voice to a whisper, her tone almost venomous. "You'll regret this, Mark. You've embarrassed me publicly. I'll make sure you pay for it." I met her glare with steady eyes. "Go ahead, Karen. I'll be right here waiting." She turned and stormed off, dust flying behind her car as she sped away. But even as I watched her leave, I knew this wasn't the end. I could sense it in her voice. She was desperate now, and desperate people made mistakes. 2 nights later, I got my proof. Around midnight, I heard movement outside, soft footsteps, the creak of the old fence gate, and the low hum of an engine idling nearby. I turned off my porch light and peeked through the blinds. There were figures moving near the barn, flashlights sweeping across the field. I grabbed my phone and started recording, zooming in through the darkness. One of the figures was unmistakable. It was Karen, wearing a dark jacket, holding a clipboard again, as if she couldn't let go of that symbol of authority. Behind her were 2 men I didn't recognize, both in work clothes, carrying what looked like surveying tools. She was trying to sneak onto my land again, this time under the cover of night. I quietly called the sheriff's department, explaining the situation, and they promised to send a deputy immediately. I stayed silent, hidden in the shadows, filming every move they made. Karen and her men walked deeper into the field, setting up a measuring line, marking stakes into the ground as if mapping out a border. She was literally redrawing boundaries in the middle of the night, hoping no one would notice. I could hardly believe it. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed in the distance, and the sound of tires on gravel echoed through the quiet. Karen froze as the patrol car pulled up to the gate. I stepped out with my flashlight, pointing it toward her. "Caught you again, Karen?" I called out. "Trespassing. This time at midnight." She turned toward me, her face pale in the beam of my light, and for a second, I thought she might actually faint. The deputy stepped out, shining his flashlight on the group. "Ma'am, what exactly are you doing here?" he asked. Karen stammered. We were just checking some boundary markers. This is part of our HOA territory," the deputy cut her off. "Ma'am, this property belongs to Mr. Mark Wilson. I have records confirming that. You're trespassing again. Step back, please." The men beside her exchanged nervous looks, clearly realizing they were in trouble. The deputy took her information, issued a written citation for trespassing, and warned her that another incident could result in arrest. Karen stood there speechless, trembling as I filmed the entire exchange. It was the final nail in her coffin. After the deputies left, Karen turned to me. her eyes filled with hatred and humiliation. "You think you've won?" she whispered. "You haven't seen the last of me," I didn't answer. I just watched as she climbed into her car and drove off into the night. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I had proof the law was on my side. Karen had finally been exposed for what she was, a bully with no real power, once the rules weren't hers to bend. Still, I knew this battle had left scars. The community was divided, and Karen's downfall had shaken the entire HOA system. People were starting to question why they'd ever given her so much control. I didn't know it yet, but her empire was about to crumble faster than either of us imagined. Because sometimes all it takes is one person standing up to the wrong tyrant to bring the whole facade crashing down. Asterisk. The days after Karen's late-night trespassing incident were strangely quiet. Almost too quiet, like the calm that hangs in the air before a storm. I had assumed she'd finally learned her lesson, that maybe the embarrassment of being caught on camera and cited by the sheriff would make her step back. But people like her rarely disappear quietly. I began hearing whispers from neighbors living inside Cedar Pines, people I'd never met before who suddenly wanted to talk. They reached out privately, some even stopping me when I drove into town. Most of them were polite, even apologetic, explaining how Karen had been running the HOA like her personal kingdom using fines, threats, and favoritism to control everything. One man, a quiet retired teacher named Alan, told me she'd fined him $200 for having a faded mailbox, and another family said she'd threatened to report them for negligent yard care because they didn't mow their grass twice a week. The more I listened, the clearer it became that Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was feared. She'd spent years building an illusion of authority so complete that even the residents believed she could ruin them if they spoke out. But after the video of the party and the midnight trespass went viral, that illusion began to crack. People were starting to see through her. And when fear fades, truth tends to follow close behind. It wasn't long before the cracks turned into fractures. The HOA board, which Karen had kept under her thumb for years, started showing signs of rebellion. 2 members resigned, one of them citing irreconcilable ethical differences with the president. Another quietly reached out to me, introducing himself as Michael, saying he wanted to make things right. He admitted that the board never approved the idea of hosting the party on my land. That was Karen's decision alone. One she justified by claiming my property had community access rights, a complete fabrication. Michael sounded exhausted, as if he had been holding his breath for years. "You exposed her," he told me, his voice low. "You don't know how many people wanted to but couldn't. You did what none of us had the courage to do." Hearing that felt strange. I hadn't set out to be some kind of hero. I just wanted peace. But now it seemed my defiance had sparked something bigger, a reckoning. Karen, however, wasn't ready to go down without a fight. A week later, I received a letter from her attorney accusing me of harassment, property defamation, and damaging the community's reputation. It was laughable. Really, nothing more than an attempt to scare me into silence. But Peter, my lawyer, advised me to respond formally. "We'll turn this around on her," he said confidently. "She's digging her own grave and she doesn't even realize it." So we filed a counterclaim: slander, harassment, repeated trespassing, all backed by documented evidence and video proof. When the papers were served to her, the whole HOA heard about it. The once untouchable Karen was now a defendant in a county civil case, her perfect image cracking for all to see. And though she tried to put on her usual smug smile in public, the weight of her downfall was written across her face. She looked different, now tired, desperate, cornered. But while she was busy fighting her legal battles, something else was brewing behind the scenes. Residents of Cedar Pines started organizing a petition to remove her as president. The same people she had intimidated for years were now meeting in driveways, backyards, and local cafes to discuss her removal. Even her closest allies began distancing themselves from her, realizing her reign was over. I stayed out of their internal politics, but word reached me that she was calling emergency HOA meetings, trying to spin herself as the victim, claiming that I had set her up with doctored footage. But in this age, where everything can be verified and shared instantly, her lies didn't hold up for long. The community didn't trust her anymore. And once trust is gone, authority follows right behind it. A few days later, while I was repairing a section of my fence, a convoy of cars pulled up near the HOA clubhouse down the road. Curious, I drove over and parked discreetly on the opposite side. Dozens of residents were gathered outside, papers in hand, voices rising in frustration. Karen stood on the steps trying to shout over the noise, insisting that outside forces were trying to dismantle their community. But no one listened. One man yelled, "You trespassed, Karen. You broke the law." Another shouted, "You lied to all of us." She tried to restore order, waving her clipboard like a gavel, but it was over. The board members walked out, one after another, refusing to back her up. It was like watching a regime collapse in real time. And even though I wasn't part of Cedar Pines, standing there watching her lose everything felt oddly satisfying, not because I wanted revenge, but because justice, for once, was finally visible. That night, I sat on my porch, watching the sunset bleed across the sky, thinking it might all finally be over. But around 9, I heard the faint rumble of an engine again, this time, coming up my driveway. A sleek black sedan stopped at my gate, and out stepped a well-dressed man holding a leather folder. I recognized him instantly. He was Karen's lawyer, the same one who'd sent that ridiculous harassment claim. He introduced himself politely and asked if we could talk. I agreed, curious about what new stunt Karen was pulling. He cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Wilson, Ms. Adams has decided to withdraw her complaint against you. She requests that you consider doing the same." I raised an eyebrow. "Just like that? After everything she's done?" He nodded slowly. "She understands things may have gone too far. She's under a lot of pressure." I could almost hear the cracks in his professional tone. Karen wasn't doing this out of goodwill. She was drowning. She wanted a way out. But something in me wasn't ready to let go yet. "Tell her," I said firmly, "that I'll withdraw when she issues a public apology to me and to every resident she's ever abused." The lawyer looked startled, but didn't argue. "I'll relay your message," he said before turning back toward his car. The next morning, social media lit up again. A shaky video appeared online showing Karen standing outside the HOA clubhouse, addressing a small group of residents and a local reporter. Her voice quivered as she read from a prepared statement. "I want to apologize for recent misunderstandings and actions that may have caused distress to members of our community and others. It was far from sincere, but it was public. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone knew who she was referring to." The apology made headlines, marking the end of her control over Cedar Pines. Within a week, she resigned as HOA president, citing health reasons. The petition succeeded, and the HOA announced plans for new leadership elections. It was surreal to see how quickly she went from feared dictator to disgraced outcast. But just when I thought everything was finally behind me, I received an unexpected call from the sheriff. He asked me to come down to the station to review something. When I arrived, he handed me a folder. Inside were printed screenshots messages between Karen and an unknown number. They revealed something shocking. Karen had been planning to sell portions of Cedar Pines Greenbelt land she didn't even own to a private developer. The surveyors she sent onto my property weren't just there to harass me, they were part of her plan to forge boundaries and make the sale look legitimate. My stomach turned as I read each message. She had been willing to commit fraud, to steal from her own community, all to line her pockets. The sheriff explained that someone from the HOA board had found the evidence and turned it in. "We're investigating," he said. "But this could lead to criminal charges." I nodded, stunned. All this time I thought she was just power-hungry, but she had been hiding a much darker motive. As I drove home that evening, the gravity of it all settled in. Karen wasn't just some meddling HOA tyrant. She was a woman who had built her life on manipulation, greed, and deceit, and now it was all coming apart. For years she thought she could rewrite boundaries, bend rules, and intimidate people into silence. But now the truth was dragging her into the light, and there was no gate she could lock to keep it out. The night air felt different, cleaner somehow. I parked my truck by the fence, looked out over my land, the same land she had once claimed as hers, and finally felt something close to peace. The following week was like watching a slow-motion collapse. Cedar Pines, once known for its pristine lawns and uniform mailboxes, had turned into a community divided between those trying to rebuild and those who still clung to the memory of Karen's rule. Every day, new details about her fraudulent scheme surfaced. The local news ran investigative pieces exposing her plan to sell off HOA land for profit, complete with recorded board meetings, forged signatures, and the involvement of a shady development firm that backed out once they realized the deal was illegal. The sheriff's department launched a full investigation, and Karen's name was now tied to words like embezzlement and forgery. I hadn't seen her since her public apology, but her absence was louder than her presence ever was. People who once trembled when she drove by were now openly laughing about her downfall, trading stories of her absurd fines and fake authority. Some of the residents even came to my property to thank me personally for standing up to her. It was strange being seen as the catalyst of change in a neighborhood I didn't even belong to. But in truth, I wasn't looking for gratitude. All I wanted was the peace that had been stolen from me the day those 10 buses rolled onto my land. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that something unfinished lingered in the air. Justice might have caught up with Karen, but she wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat quietly. Late one evening, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, I noticed headlights in the distance, slowly approaching. My instincts tensed. The car stopped just beyond the fence, and for a moment all I saw were the outlines of 2 figures inside. Then the door opened, and to my disbelief, Karen stepped out. Her once perfect hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled, and her face looked pale and hollow, as though the life had been drained from her. I didn't move at first. I wanted to see what she would do. She walked up to the gate, stopping a few feet away, and stood there silently, staring at the property as if it were something sacred she had lost. "You shouldn't be here," I said finally, standing up and walking toward her. Her voice cracked when she replied, "I know. I just needed to see it one last time." I frowned. "See what? The land you tried to take?" She lowered her eyes. "No. The place where everything fell apart?" I studied her carefully, trying to decide if this was another manipulation or genuine remorse. She looked defeated in a way I hadn't thought possible for someone like her. After a long pause, she spoke again. "You were right, Mark, about all of it. I thought I was helping the community, but I was just feeding my own need to control things." Her tone wavered with something between regret and self-pity. When people listened to me, I felt powerful, important. I told myself I was protecting them. But deep down I knew I was just scared of losing relevance. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure what to say. For months, she had tormented me, trespassed on my land, lied, and humiliated innocent neighbors. Her sudden confession didn't erase any of that. "The sheriff's office will probably charge you soon," I said quietly. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. "I know, and I deserve it. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry before it's too late." I wanted to believe her, but a part of me still didn't trust her motives. Yet seeing her standing there broken, stripped of all her false confidence, something in me softened. "You should go home, Karen," I said after a long silence. "Make things right with the people who still care about you. Don't come back here again." She nodded once, turned, and walked back to her car without another word. As her headlights disappeared into the night, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice might be coming, but it was hard not to see her as a cautionary tale of her own making. The next morning, I woke up to a phone call from Peter, my lawyer. "You might want to sit down," he said. "Karen was taken into custody early this morning. They found enough evidence to charge her with multiple counts of fraud and misuse of HOA funds." For a moment, I didn't say anything. It wasn't surprising, but hearing it made the entire ordeal feel final. "What happens now?" I asked. "She'll probably be facing trial," Peter replied. "Her lawyer's trying to negotiate a plea deal, but given how much documentation the sheriff has, it won't be easy." I thanked him and hung up, staring out the window at the land beyond my fence. The grass swayed gently under the morning sun. Everything felt calm. Again, real peace this time. Not the fragile kind that comes between conflicts. I thought about how it had all started with Karen trying to throw an HOA party on my land. acting like she owned everything she could see. That single moment of arrogance had set off a chain reaction that destroyed everything she'd built. It was poetic, in a tragic way. In the following weeks, life returned to normal. The HOA elected a new president, Michael, the board member who had tried to reach out earlier. He was honest, practical, and transparent about every decision, which earned him the trust of residents quickly. They even held a community meeting, inviting local property owners, including me, to discuss better cooperation and communication moving forward. I attended mostly out of curiosity. Michael gave a short speech about rebuilding trust, ending the culture of fear, and learning from mistakes. When he thanked me publicly for standing firm, I felt an unexpected wave of humility. I hadn't realized how far the ripple effects of that one locked gate had gone. People applauded, some even clapping me on the back, saying things like, "You did what none of us could." It felt strange but good to know that doing the right thing, even when it came from frustration, could lead to something bigger than revenge. One afternoon, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a short note and a folded photograph. The note read, "Thank you for teaching me a lesson I should have learned years ago. I'll carry it with me, wherever I end up. Karen." The photograph was of cedar pines back when it was first built, before the fence's rules. And restrictions, just open fields and a few scattered homes surrounded by trees. I stared at it for a long time, realizing what it symbolized. Karen had built her identity around control, but she'd forgotten what community truly meant. Maybe, in some distant way, she finally understood it now. I placed the photo in my desk drawer, not out of sentimentality, but as a reminder of what happens when power turns into obsession. By the end of that month, Karen's trial became the talk of the county. Local stations broadcasted updates daily, how she pleaded guilty to certain charges, how the HOA filed civil suits for restitution, how her once loyal friends had turned witnesses. She didn't get jail time, but she was sentenced to community service and ordered to repay the funds she had stolen. From what I heard, she moved away afterward, leaving cedar pines behind for good. And as strange as it sounds, part of me hoped she'd find peace somewhere else, far from the world she'd tried to dominate. For me, life settled back into rhythm. I repaired the old barn roof, tended to my garden, and took quiet walks across the property in the evenings. The fence that once symbolized division now felt like a boundary of peace, a line drawn not just on land, but in principle. Standing by the gate one night, I thought back to that fateful day when the 10 buses rolled in. Engines rumbling and laughter echoing, and I smiled. What had started as chaos ended as closure. But as much as I wanted to believe the story was over, I couldn't shake a faint curiosity about what might come next. Because in places like Cedar Pines, peace is fragile. And power, no matter how small, has a way of finding new hands to tempt. Months passed, and life in Cedar Pines slowly returned to a fragile version of normal. The HOA, under new leadership, worked hard to undo the damage Karen had left behind, repealing unfair fines, returning overcharged dues, and rebuilding trust between neighbors who had once lived in quiet fear of stepping out of line. The mood in the neighborhood was lighter, freer, like a long, suffocating storm had finally cleared. I saw families walking dogs on the street again, kids riding bikes without worrying if their chalk drawings violated some obscure HOA clause, and people laughing during their evening barbecues without glancing over their shoulders. The suffocating weight that had once hovered over Cedar Pines was gone. From my porch, I watched it all with a quiet kind of satisfaction. The land that had once caused so much chaos was now a symbol of something else entirely, a boundary that stood for fairness and freedom, for the right to say no when someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. My property line had become more than a fence. It was the line between truth and control, and I'd made sure everyone saw the difference. One afternoon, as autumn leaves began to scatter across the yard, Michael, the new HOA president, stopped by. He handed me a small wooden plaque engraved with neat letters, in appreciation for standing up for what's right. I didn't know what to say at first. It wasn't about awards or recognition for me, but his gesture felt genuine, and I appreciated it. He smiled and said, You changed this place, Mark. You showed us what happens when people stop being afraid." I thanked him and told him it wasn't about bravery, just stubbornness. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was about principle. We talked for a while about the future of the community, about making sure no one person ever gained unchecked control again. Before leaving, he said something that stuck with me. "Power isn't dangerous by itself, it's dangerous when it goes unchallenged." Those words would echo in my head for weeks afterward. As winter rolled in, I thought about everything that had happened. The buses, the party, the trespassing, the legal battles, the downfall. It felt like a lifetime ago, yet the memory was still sharp. I remembered the sound of those engines rumbling through my gate that first day. The disbelief I'd felt as I watched strangers setting up tents and tables on my land. I remembered Karen's smug smile, her insistence that it was for the community, and how that moment had sparked a chain reaction no one could have predicted. I realized something important then. Sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't just protect you, it protects others too. Because once one person draws a line and refuses to let it be crossed, it gives others the courage to draw their own. I didn't hear much about Karen for a while. Most said she had moved 3 towns over, trying to start fresh under a different name. But trouble has a way of following those who refuse to change. About 6 months later, I got a call from a local reporter who'd been following her story. She told me that Karen had tried joining another HOA board in her new town, claiming she had years of community leadership experience. It didn't last long. Once people found out about her past, she was forced to resign. That part of her life was over for good. It was poetic justice, the kind that doesn't need revenge, only time. I hung up the phone and smiled faintly, not out of spite, but out of closure. Karen's story had ended exactly as it should. Not with triumph, but with silence. Life moved on. The fields grew taller. The fence weathered another season. My days became simple again, mornings spent fixing equipment, afternoons tending to the land, evenings spent watching the horizon fade into gold. The chaos she brought had faded into a distant memory, replaced by the steady rhythm of peace. Every so often I'd get visitors, neighbors from Cedar Pines who still remembered the ordeal. They'd come by to share coffee or talk about how different things were now. The HOA had turned from an instrument of control into something closer to what it was meant to be, a support system, not a threat. It was strange how something that began as a feud between 2 people had reshaped an entire community. Then one evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, I heard the low hum of engines in the distance again. For a brief moment, my chest tightened, that old instinct of tension returning. I looked down the dirt road and saw a line of headlights approaching slowly. But this time, it wasn't buses or trespassers. It was a convoy of cars from the community, each one bringing neighbors, families, and friends. They parked near the fence, laughing and carrying trays of food, waving when they saw me. Michael stepped forward with a grin. "We figured it's time for a real party on our own land, with permission this time." I laughed, shaking my head. "You sure about that?" "Last time a party started here, it didn't end so well," he chuckled. "This one's different. This one's for everyone." They set up tables on the HOA side, careful not to cross the property line, but the atmosphere was open, friendly, honest. The sound of laughter drifted across the fence, not as noise this time, but as music. I stood there for a while watching them celebrate, not with control, but with connection, and I realized that was what community was supposed to look like all along. As the night deepened and stars filled the sky, I walked back to the gate and looked out one last time. I thought about how everything had come full circle, from being invaded to watching the same place turn into a symbol of respect. Life had a way of balancing things, even when it took the long way around. I leaned against the gate, smiling to myself as the sounds of distant laughter and music carried through the air, mixing with the soft rustle of leaves. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud, not just of what I'd done, but of what it had led to. Because in the end, it wasn't about revenge or humiliation. It was about setting things right, about proving that no matter how much power someone thinks they have, the truth will always find a way to break through. And if there's one thing I learned through it all, that standing up to the wrong person at the right time can change more than a situation. It can change an entire neighborhood. So if you're listening to this story right now, remember this. Sometimes all it takes to make a difference is to say no when it matters most. Don't let anyone convince you that standing your ground makes you difficult. It makes you strong. And if you ever find yourself facing your own Karen, just remember that the gate only locks from your side. You have more power than you think. Thank you for being part of this journey. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe to Sham Stories for more powerful HOA dramas, real-life inspired revenge tales, and unforgettable moments of justice served right wad. Because the next story might just begin with a gate, a rule book, and someone who picked the wrong neighbor to mess with.